Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's kick off today's video with a story about a clever twist on the classic rules or rules scenario. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. I can't use a shopping cart, but I can put some items on the checkout counter? As you wish. About a year or two ago, I did a lot of shopping at a grocery store for work. Sometimes I would need to grab items from the liquor store attached inside the grocery store. The liquor store operated as its own separate little store with its own checkout, but it was still owned by the grocery store, and you had to enter from inside the grocery store. When you enter the liquor store, there's a sign that you must leave your shopping cart outside. This normally makes sense as the liquor store's small and having people and carts all around would cause quite the traffic jam. On to the day in question. On my list for this shopping trip, I had a full load of liquor to get for the bar at work, and for a holiday party, I probably needed around 15 handles of assorted booze. As I walked into the liquor store for this shopping trip, there was no one else around except for the cashier. Knowing I had a large number of items to purchase, I asked if I could bring my empty cart in and park it next to the checkout spot so I could load it with all the liquor bottles I needed to purchase. I was met with a very nasty, "No, don't you see the sign?" I tried to explain the situation and how I needed many more bottles than I could possibly carry, plus there were no handheld baskets around for me to try and manage. The cashier wasn't having it and told me if I really couldn't carry everything at once, I could place some items on the checkout counter while I went to get more. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. I only needed about 15 bottles to cover the month's supply of booze, but I figured why not go ahead and get stocked up for the next month? I spent about 15 minutes running back and forth from the shelves to the counter, placing more and more items down, taking up the whole counter. As I was doing this, a few customers came in, and I watched the cashier struggle to work around my items in order to scan and check out the other customers. The look on the cashier's face was glorious as he had to work around a problem he created for himself. When I finally did check out, the cashier didn't have enough room on the checkout counter to scan and bag my items. So get this, the cashier then told me I could bring my cart in to put the bottles in to make room on the counter. I jokingly asked if he knew that carts were prohibited in the liquor store, but he didn't laugh at that one. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I went and got my cart anyways because it would have been a huge inconvenience to me to run back and forth from the counter to my cart. I genuinely understand the store's policy on this, but sometimes there needs to be exceptions to the rule. Exceptions totally make sense, but my first thought for the ban isn't the carts taking up space so much as people bumping them into shelves and breaking bottles. People aren't always very careful with carts. And our second story. Don't do anything else until this gets done. So some background. My boss is usually a really cool guy and I love working at my job, but some days he's just in a mood and decides that one thing's more important than anything else and makes me drop everything. When he's like this, he always ends his tirade with, "Don't argue with me, just do it." So I usually work to get it done as fast as possible while also getting my other work done. However, today I actually had some answers he's been waiting for, but he wasn't here this morning. Meetings happen, no big deal. And sent an email saying he'd be in this afternoon. No problem, I'll get done what I can. So he walks in and says his hellos and goes to his office to get settled. I always give him like 10 minutes before I hand him all the stuff I need him to deal with because I hate just throwing it on him when he comes in. So I get all my stuff together to go talk to him, but he comes back out and slaps a paper on my desk. He's asking why this hasn't been dealt with yet. I explain, as I had before several times, that I can't get this done because it's a government document and they will not let me make changes to our account on his behalf. He says, "I don't need excuses, just get it done today. Don't take calls, don't do anything else, just get this done." I told him I can call them, but they won't talk to me. He would need to speak with them. I also told him the last time I called, I was on hold for over 3 hours because, yay, government. He doesn't care. Don't worry about anything else until this is dealt with. Don't argue with me, just do it. You got it, boss. I've been on hold for about an hour now and have won a few games of solitaire. Think I'll switch to Mahjong in a bit. We can deal with my other crap tomorrow. Bonus, they have an option to leave a voicemail to get a call back, but last time I did that, they called long after business hours. Plus, well, I was told to not worry about anything else. Update, got through and got it done just in time for me to go home. He asked what account I worked on this afternoon, and I said I didn't. I couldn't do anything until I was off the phone. He saw the humor in it, admitted his wording was his downfall. Like I said, he's a pretty cool guy, plus he knows I can pick it up tomorrow and get things done. Wow, sounds like your boss can be quite demanding. Good thing you were able to get it done in the end and maintain a sense of humor about it. And our next story. HOA Toad To Car. So my family lives in HOA. The CCRs, written in 2000, do state that all cars, including guests, must be parked in driveway or in the backyard out of sight. There aren't any no parking signs outside our home except a paper taped to a light pole that I never noticed until trying to look for a sign after this happened. We park our 2 cars in the driveway. Several of our neighbors have more than 2 cars and park on the streets constantly. Last night, my mom's friend came over to pick her up. She arrived around 7:30. And when they went to leave shortly after 8, her car had been towed for parking in a no parking zone, while many of our neighbors still had cars on the street. We have a guest parking area down the street, but it requires purchasing a permit, which we've never been instructed on how to do, and this friend is disabled, so walking over a block to and from her car is just too much. HOA board members engage in this kind of bullcrap because they get away with it. They get away with it because the HOA members let them. They can be called out and held accountable when they abuse their authority. We called them out, but that doesn't work, so we hired a lawyer to threaten litigation for breach of duty. With the threat of litigation looming, the HOA board was forced to reconsider their actions. Ultimately, they conceded their mistake, acknowledging the lack of proper signage and issuing a formal apology. And our last story. My parents versus the bank. In 1973, my parents had enough money to build a little ranch house in the country. A small bank in town approved the mortgage, and the bank signed a contract to give Bob the money to build the house. Bob, as it turns out, was overbooking himself all over town, leaving his clueless minions to do the actual work. The build took longer and longer, with more and more work having to be ripped out and redone. We're not talking about using the wrong color paint or nailing up some wonky trim here. The architect forgot to fully erase a line on the blueprints, and the framers built a wall through the bathtub. My mother was told, don't put anything heavy in the kitchen cabinets because they were attached to drywall, not the studs, using a few roofing nails through the back of each cabinet. The garage door opening was framed into the living room instead of towards the driveway, and so on. When the bank's representative showed up for the final inspection, my parents met him in the front yard and refused to sign off on Bob's work. Then representative became angry as the bank had paid Bob a lot of money. He strode to the front door and pulled on the doorknob, wherein the entire door, casing included, fell on him. It had simply been wedged, not nailed into place. The bank called Bob, who finally showed up to supervise the work himself. The only problem was that Bob wasn't any better at building a house than his minions were. My parents still refused to sign off on the house. My mother was a som in a nasty rental with 2 tiny children, while my dad was working 2 jobs while this was going on. Throughout the entire process, the bank and Bob treated them very poorly, bullying my mom and lying to my dad. What should have been an exciting time for my parents was ruined. My mom cried a lot. My dad got depressed. Finally, the bank threatened my parents with foreclosure, and Bob threatened to sue my parents for breach of contract because the bank refused to pay him any more money. So my exhausted parents went to an attorney and gave him the rundown: plumbing, electrical, tiling issues, the whole sorry mess. My parents were scared. All they had was their small down payment savings, so if this became a lengthy court battle, the bank and Bob would win. The attorney, Tom, was kind, but my dad said he could tell that he and Mom were doomed from Tom's facial expressions as he sorted through the paperwork. Then abruptly, Tom smiled. "Let's get everyone together for a meeting," he told my parents, "tomorrow." So my parents, Tom, the bank's representative, the bank's attorney, Bob, and Bob's attorney met at the bank. Tom didn't give anyone else time to begin. He said, Well, my clients have decided they no longer want this house. Please remove it. Everyone else started to laugh. Remove it? Have you lost your mind? Tom, in a sweeping theatrical gesture, placed a deed on the table. My clients own the land the house is sitting on outright. They no longer want the house. Get the house off my client's land. Bob's attorney stared at the deed and then turned and stared at Bob. You built a house on land you don't own? Bob nodded. The bank's attorney started yelling at the bank's representative. You didn't finance the land the house is on? The representative stammered. No. Tom said firmly, as I said, gentlemen, you're trespassing on my client's land. I expect the house to be removed and the land returned to its original state at once. My dad said he'll remember the blank looks everyone on the other side of the table passed to one another for his whole life. Sure, the bank could foreclose on a house that wouldn't exist by the end of the week with no way to recoup the money. They didn't even own the land it was on. Bob was out the 50% he'd paid out of pocket, plus he was on the hook for tearing down the house and removing it. On top of that, the bank would undoubtedly want him to repay the initial 50% they'd given him. Could they have gone after my parents? Sure, a foreclosure would have meant bad credit for my parents moving forward. They might lose their down payment, but to sign off on the house in its condition at that time would have meant thousands and thousands of dollars in cash to replace and repair everything from the roof to the basement before the house could be safely lived in. The bank knew my parents didn't have that kind of money. They're the ones who approved the mortgage. Suddenly, my parents were good people, and it was all such a misunderstanding, and the bank and Bob couldn't do enough for them. The house was brought in line with the original blueprints and specifications immediately, at no extra cost to my parents, but at considerable cost to Bob. My parents signed the mortgage, Bob got the rest of his money, and just about broke even on the build. The bank's representative was fired. And Tom, attorney extraordinaire, got a stinging tale of triumph to recall to fellow attorneys for the rest of his life. Before you question this tale, please remember that 1973 was 50 years ago. Banks did things differently back then. Smaller, rural banks in particular were not run the same way the bigger city banks were. There were far fewer federal regulations, and in a smaller community, people didn't always follow them anyway. I'm pretty sure they don't always follow them now. Yes, they built a wall through the bathtub. No, I'm not making that up. I even left out how the plumber left his lunch bag on a partially built kitchen cabinet, but the cabinet maker didn't feel it was his job to move the bag, so he left it there and built the rest of the cabinet around it. I don't know where Bob found these people, but they were gems, every one of them. I'll add that small towns back then likely played the good old boy game, and Bob and Banker were probably the best of friends. The inspector, if they existed, were likely part of it. Glad they got some justice in their dream house. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.